Kris isn't the Knight of Deltarune. How do I know? Well, it all has to do with this one horse stable and entry number 17 from Undertale. So last time I talked about the Knight, not many people liked it. Let's just say it had a good premise, but it had a lot of problems. So the reason I'm talking about the Knight again is because new evidence has come up that I just didn't notice before. So I decided, why not remake the entire video? You don't need to watch the previous Knight theory to understand this one, because this is the definitive Deltarune Knight theory. Make sure to subscribe and like. Let's get into it. So entry number 17 is quite possibly the biggest unsolved mystery to Undertale. Nobody really knows what it means. There have been attempts to crack it, but I don't think that many people actually have brought up the evidence that I will be bringing up today. Now, if you have no clue what entry number 17 is, I highly recommend watching my W.D Gaster explained video. Oh yeah, and Gaster is the Knight. Now, of course, you aren't going to believe me until I show you the evidence. So before we get into the deep stuff regarding how Gaster is the Knight in this theory, we need to talk about Deltarune Chapter 1's opening for a better understanding of the evidence I'm about to showcase to you. Deltarune Chapter 1's opening is the most confusing start to a video game I've ever seen. But if you're an Undertale lore enthusiast like me, then you may have a lucky guess as to what exactly is going on here. This sequence is crucial to the rest of this theory. The voice that plays here is in fact Dr. Gaster, and there is significant proof of it. Gaster is firstly extremely well known to speak in all capital letters. This has been established by entry number 17 in Undertale. Nextly, the vessel you create is labeled as Goner in the game files, another thing that has a small relation to Gaster. We'll get into Goners later in this theory as well, so stay tuned for that. Finally, the biggest relation of all is the name of the music that plays here. Gaster's theme in the game files of Undertale is labeled as hymn.ogg. In the game files of Deltarune, the music that plays here during this first initial sequence is labeled as another hymn.ogg. Phew, okay, I know I kind of rushed through that, but I really want to just get into the meat of this theory. In my original Knight theory, I stated that there are actually two separate Gasters pulling the strings from behind the scenes. I actually still believe that's the case. Deltarune isn't the same world as the Undertale world. In this game, the human and monster war didn't happen, so a lot of stuff has changed, such as Undyne not losing her eye, or Asgore not being king and Toriel not being queen. Alphys isn't a royal scientist, there is no royal guard, everything and everyone is peaceful. So if all of these changes take place, there is one change that I often think about. According to the Gaster lore, Gaster was the royal scientist before Alphys. That is, until he fell into his creation and was scattered across time and space. Now, why would this event actually unfold if there isn't a royal scientist to begin with? So by technicality terms, Gaster wouldn't even have a creation to fall into. If there are equivalents to almost every character from Undertale into Deltarune, then there has to be an equivalent to Gaster as well. That's why the music track at the beginning of Deltarune Chapter 1 is called Another Hymn, because it is in fact another hymn. So there is a Gaster from Undertale and a Gaster from Deltarune. Now, what are they doing here? I mean, what's their purpose? Well, it's kinda hard to say. We know that for a fact it is Gaster that is making the secret bosses such as Spamton and Jevil insane based on the context clues we get after we beat the secret bosses. If you didn't know that, again, I highly recommend checking out my Gaster Explained video. Have you ever wondered what is Deltarune? I mean, how did this alternate game even get here in the first place? Well, in my original Knight theory, I used Soul Theory to determine that the world of Deltarune is just one giant science experiment by Gaster. And well, I still think that's the case, but instead of using Soul Theory to use as proof for this experiment, I now have sufficient factual evidence coming directly from Undertale that this world is just an experiment from Gaster, and it has to do with entry number 17. So going back, prior to the release of Deltarune Chapter 1, the Undertale Twitter blacked out and started talking in all capital letters. Now this is Gaster speaking here, and the reason we know that is because if you count the squares in the username of the Undertale Twitter, it comes out as the same characters as Gaster's name. It also matches up perfectly to the first vessel creation sequence in Chapter 1. So anyway, I found something rather intriguing about these tweets. Not the fact that they're in capital letters, but what exactly they say. I'll read them off now. Welcome. Have you been looking for me? How wonderful. I have been looking for you as well. I have something I want to show you. Something I think you will find very, very interesting. But it is not complete yet. No, it is far from complete. Thus, I have a small favor to ask of you. Return here in 24 hours. At that time, I will ask you a few questions. Then, using your responses, we will approach its realization. Thank you very much for your time. I will be in contact again soon. One day later, the Twitter goes on to say this. Thank you for waiting so long. After all, you and I, we have both been waiting such a very long time. So to be here, finally, on the verge of connection, is quite exciting. I look forward to creating a new future with you. Now, show yourself, Deltarune. Deltarune was released directly after that last tweet. If you caught it, there is something of significance in these lines of tweets. Specifically, this one where he says, I quote, something I think you will find very, very interesting. This last line is the exact quote from entry number 17. If you need a refresher as to what entry number 17 said, here's the exact translation of it. Thanks for the Undertale wiki for it. Those tweets are speaking almost as if this person is the creator of Deltarune. Well, we all know Toby is the creator. But from a game canon standpoint, it seems that whoever is tweeting this is actively creating this new adventure. Now, this does provide sufficient evidence to back up the theory that Deltarune is being made by Gaster. But what about the experiment part? And you know, just a set of tweets is not going to be able to make people think this is true. So we need to go back further in time. So, if you didn't know, Deltarune.com was in fact existent for much longer than most people think. If you manage to get to Deltarune.com before its eventual change, you'll be greeted with Wingding's text, which means that Gaster is speaking. In fact, it's an exact quote from entry number 17. It reads, "This next experiment seems very, very interesting." The website was changed later to another set of Wingding's text. It says, 3 heroes appear to banish the angel's heaven. Finally, the website was changed once more, and that change was at Deltarune's release. This altogether practically confirms my theory from before that Deltarune is just one giant experiment made by Gaster. The next experiment that Gaster is talking about in entry number 17 is Deltarune. In fact, we already know a lot about what entry number 17 is implying now. The darkness that he is talking about at the beginning of the entry is related to Deltarune. I mean, come on, the entire plot is around sealing dark worlds. Heck, even the shadows make sense now, with the inclusion of shadow crystals from Deltarune Chapter 2. To put the icing on the cake, on the Nintendo Switch version of Undertale, Clam Girl was changed. She explained that you'll be meeting her neighbor's daughter Susie soon. She then turns gray, becomes Goner Clam Girl, disappears, and the sped up version of Gaster's theme is played. This means that Goner Clam Girl knew of the existence of Deltarune and relayed a message to you through Undertale. So perhaps Goner Clam Girl was sent by Gaster to relay this message. Anyway, so this is called the Deltarune Night Theory, and as of right now, I have not spoken at all regarding the Night of Deltarune. Well, there is significant proof that Gaster is the Knight, or at least one of the Gasters is. Anyway, in Undertale, the sprite that most people commonly refer to as Gaster is called the Mystery Man in the game files. So oftentimes, most people refer to Gaster as the Man, as the river person even says beware of the man that speaks in hands, with Wingdings being a font that has a bunch of hand symbols in it. So in Deltarune, I'm sure you are aware of this egg scene. Somebody called the Man ends up giving it to you. People say that this man is Gaster, and well, I think I'll actually agree with that. The egg, upon itself, means absolutely nothing of value, but the name is a rather interesting one. If you translate egg to uppercase Wingding's font, you'll get a bunch of hand symbols. These hand symbols are the exact movements that a knight would make in a board game, and Deltarune Chapter 1 was completely made up of board games and cards, so that fits perfectly. Now, just the egg alone isn't hard proof that Gaster is the knight. For that, let's turn back to Undertale. So, Gaster has many different forms in the series of Undertale. There's the most popular Mystery Man sprite, and there's this sprite. Yeah. So, in the game files of Undertale exists an unused horse stable. If you unlock this horse stable with an unused key, you can find this sprite inside of it. It'll simply say X in lowercase Wingding's font. But when you cried out, this sprite can't be Gaster, because Gaster always speaks in capital letters. Well, not all the time. If we're saying that at the beginning of Chapter 1 is Gaster, keep in mind that also during this sequence, normal grammar is used directly after. Even the Undertale Twitter uses normal grammar the day after Deltarune was released. So we can assume that yes, most of the time Gaster does use capital letters, but he can also speak in lowercase as well, based on those two pieces of evidence. Now, this figure just saying X in lowercase Wingding's font isn't enough to say that this sprite is Gaster. Well, to determine this is Gaster, we need to look look at another location the sprite appears in. It appears in an unused room. If you speak to the sprite, this time it'll say Redacted in Wingding's font. If you leave the room, it'll take you to the sound test room where Gaster's theme can be played. Now, most people will assume that this is just unused shenanigans left over by Toby. This may not actually be the case. I mean, keep in mind, entry number 17 is also in the game files, and is also in an unused room, like this sprite. The only difference here is the annoying dog check, which could have easily been put in place to make the Gaster mystery more difficult to understand. I mean, this is proven by ABC123. Without Toby just doesn't want people spoiling the game, so he just makes it hard to reach the game files. There's so much stuff in the game files of Undertale regarding Gaster that we have to take it all into consideration. Not to mention that one of the Gaster followers explains that they're holding a piece of Gaster before disappearing, but the Mysteries Man sprite is nowhere to be found. If Gaster was shattered across time and space, perhaps he has just many different forms altogether. But what does this sprite have to do with the knight? Horse stables don't fit Gaster's character at all. I mean, if Gaster was a scientist, why would he be in a horse stable? Well, it may actually mean something of significance if you look at a knight chess piece. The knight in board games is often represented by a horse, just like how Gaster is in a horse stable in Undertale. And of course, Deltarune Chapter 1 was almost entirely centered around board games. And just like that, we have done it. Theory complete. Thanks for watching, and check out all of my Undertale theories.